Hello. Welcome back to Let's Talk H.P. Lovecraft. If you have not yet subscribed to our channel, please take a moment to do that now. Alright then, here on Let's Talk H.P. Lovecraft, we have been methodically working our way through the collection The Crawling Chaos and Others, a collection of sort of revisions and collaborations done by Lovecraft that are not counted generally among his greatest works, but some of them are in fact pretty good. And today we shall see if The Curse of Yig is one of the good ones. First published in 1929 in Weird Tales, it was written by Zealia Bishop and H.P. Lovecraft, though it appears that Bishop mainly provided the story concept, the idea, and a little bit of notes on what she thought, what direction it should go in, and then it seems like Lovecraft did the bulk of the writing. The way these reviews work is that I give a brief synopsis of what happened in the action of the story, and then at the end of the video, I try to put it all in perspective, say what it all means, and whether the story sort of holds up as one of Lovecraft's betters. The narrator, in 1925, is studying snake lore the snake lore of Native Americans, rather, in Oklahoma. And the trail of his research leads him to one Dr. McNeil, who operates an asylum. McNeil thinks that the narrator is young, but he seems to know more on the subject than others, and so he seems to trust him, and he takes him down to the bowels of the asylum and lets him peep through the crack in the door and shows him a bald, hairless, slithering, hissing humanoid shape on the floor. McNeil then takes the narrator up to his office and relates to him a story containing, he says, no magic, but happening beginning in 1889. The story is about young Walker and Audrey Davis, Audrey his bride, and they set out by wagon from Arkansas to create a homestead in Oklahoma. From tales heard by various Native Americans who they encounter along the way, Walker develops a crippling fear of snakes, and so along the way, you're bound to see snakes out there on the frontier. Audrey, in fact, comes across a nest of them, newborn rattlesnakes, and she decides to hack them to pieces with an axe to spare her husband the possible the threat of him seeing them, but he does stumble across her doing this, and this freaks him out even more because he now fears that Yig will track them down. Yig, this Native American deity, is said to have a long memory and someday should seek revenge on them. But nothing happens, nothing immediately, at least. They get to Oklahoma, they build their farm. Audrey hears further tales of snakes from their neighbor, Sally Compton, who tells her the tale of a man who supposedly was bit by an entire nest of rattlesnakes, and all the venom in his blood, causing the inflammation, supposedly resulted him in actually exploding, which is pretty ridiculous. One Halloween, the Davises hold a harvest/Halloween festival at their cabin. The weather having just turned cold, indicating the beginning of the end of the summer and the fall season. Afterwards, they're laying in bed and they hear sounds outside. Walker thinks that it's just crickets, but Audrey has this growing fear that it may be serpents, snakes. The children of Yig come to enact revenge on her for killing his children. But, chances are maybe it's just drawn to the fire. As happens with snakes, they like heat. Walker goes out and checks. He immediately collapses. You hear a thud on the floor. He doesn't return. And Audrey lays in their bed, and she is, over the next few minutes and hours, consumed by her fear. She thinks that he's been killed, and she thinks that there's going to be a giant nest of snakes out there, and that she even thinks like she feels them slithering towards her. But she then gains a little bit of courage. She realizes that the axe is there in the corner. She grabs the axe and begins swinging it wildly at something she perceives to be large and humanoid and slithering on the floor, trying to kill her. Their neighbor, Sally Compton, visits the next morning, and she finds three things, according to Dr. McNeil. The Davis dog, bit by many snakes and having exploded and puffed up from all the venom. Walker himself laying on the floor, unbit, but apparently hacked to pieces by an axe. And then Audrey on the floor, writhing, hissing, acting like a snake. McNeil then reveals that the thing locked away in the asylum basement is, in fact, not Audrey, as you might have guessed, but in fact, one of her children. He says that months later, after the events, but before her own death, she gave birth to a brood of slithering, weird humanoid creatures without hair, and that all of them died except for this one, who lives on in the basement of the asylum. Okay, so I'm going to skip right to the end as far as the analysis goes. One of the hallmarks of Lovecraft is his fear, is what fear does to us, the fear of the unknown, and a cold, uncaring universe that doesn't give a crap about you, but also how fear causes the mind to implode. I love that Audrey's terror results in her killing her husband, and that quite possibly causes her to transform herself, to believe that, yes, I'm turning into this thing, therefore I am this thing. The power of what really does happen, not so severely, but with mental illness. But you have had people with tremendously messed up implications to, being tortured or raised in captivity and not exposed to the world. And we do know that to some extent, some pretty bizarre things can happen to you. This is, expanded on. This is glamorized a little bit. I don't know if anybody actually thinks they're a snake, but you can see where, going back to the part of the story where McNeil says, there's no magic in this story. He's supposed to be a scientist, a psychiatrist, a psychologist, not believing in magic, not believing in these legends, but the fear of the legend causes all the Native Americans in the story to act a certain way. I didn't mention it in the description, but apparently this time of year, in the fall, they all constantly, in this story anyway, banging their drums, singing, and it's all said to be about warding off Yig and his dangerous little buddies, the snakes. So you can see how fear can affect an entire culture, at least within the context of the story, and I love that. I also love how... I guess what I was trying to say was that the whole thing could have been a psychosomatic reaction to the fear. But moving on, great atmosphere throughout the story. I love how it's being written and taking place in the mid-20s, but it's telling back to a tale of the late 1800s and European Americans moving west and coming into contact with these legends. And it's cool to think that my grandfather... Yes, this is fictional, but my grandfather was born in 1906. His parents were born well into the 1800s. So we think of 2023 being so far into the future, but really it's not that far back to a more superstitious, more wild past. And then you get to, from Lovecraft's perspective, writing in the 20s, this is right on the cusp of, you're between world wars. Mechanized warfare has occurred for the first time. There's new inventions coming into creation. And then a little bit later, shortly after his death, World War II happens, and that totally changes everything. So I love how you can portray the 20s as being sort of this period that's actually, in a way, a time on the fringes between a sort of mythical American past and the present and the future. Throughout the story, they portray Yig as supposedly having been an older, malicious form of Quetzalcoatl, the semi-benevolent god who we all know about, serpent god. But it's said that Yig is... is the older, malicious version, and that Quetzalcoatl was, in fact, a more benign, overwritten version of it. And although, this is fictional, cultures actually do this. Many cultures have different, long-lived cultures at least, have different versions of the same god, and then they have neighboring cultures have versions of the god that were influenced by their neighbors, and so it lends a sense of reality even within the space of this really, really weird fiction. But yeah, as far as mythical gods go, and gods that are feared, serpents are at the top of a list, even in Christianity, of course. That's the big one. So it's a very aptly chosen form of deity to select for this. Within Lovecraft, he has all this pantheon of outer gods, deep ones, old ones, and they're all very, very alien. This is somehow more relatable, and I think that's pretty cool to see him sort of come down to earth a little bit in that respect. Negative, not a fan of the way the story is formatted. We have a narrator telling us a story about how he goes to Dr. McNeil, and then for most of the story, Dr. McNeil is telling the story. So we're hearing that story, and then within that story that Dr. McNeil tells us, we hear that Native Americans and Sally Compton and others have been telling the characters' stories. So it's too many stories couched within too many different stories, and it doesn't quite work as effectively as it probably should. One of the things that my college writing professor always said is, don't do flashbacks. Don't keep doing that. It's sort of a cop-out. It's sort of an easy way to give characters a lot of information. What you should typically do is find out where the true start of the story is, the important part, and begin there. And I think that would have been a good advice for Lovecraft and Zealia Bishop when choosing how to format the Curse of Yig. But yeah, not a bad little tale. I think it's more good than bad, but it's not perfect. I can see why this is a story that falls into a collection like this, rather than typically being presented in the main collections that are usually entitled The Complete Fiction of H.P. Lovecraft, which are not actually The Complete Fiction of H.P. Lovecraft. But there you have it. I liked it. I suggest it take you about 30 minutes to 45 minutes to read or listen to if you find the audiobook version. And I would do that because it's Lovecraft. Even bad Lovecraft is still pretty good. So it's been a good morning reading this and sharing my thoughts on The Curse of Yig with you. We are quickly nearing the end of the Crawling Chaos and Others already. Yeah, I wasn't expecting that. Just a couple more stories to go in that collection. The next one is The Electric Executioner. Thank you for tuning in. Please subscribe. And until next time, keep it creepy.